Good evening, folks. This is Country Steve. I want to talk about a very important topic tonight, and the topic I want to discuss tonight is church security. With all the major incidents that have been happening recently across the country, and I live here in suburban Chicago, and we recently had an incident of a former retired police sergeant that was in our church, and he was accused of showing pornographic material to a child on his cell phone, and it's been all over the Chicago news. And apparently, this gentleman he's a convicted felon. He was accused of setting fire to a homeless man's tent in the suburban Chicago suburb of Naperville, and his name is 75-year-old James Pavolo, and he's a retired Chicago police sergeant. And I just want to say this for the record: I don't know this gentleman, but whoever he is, I just hope that when he goes to trial, I just hope that the justice is served and he is convicted, and I just hope he is put away for a very long time so he is not able to commit any more of these crimes, or at least he either gets some type of help, because this is very disturbing. But what I want to talk about tonight is I want to talk about church security and some of the things that our local churches can do to keep our members safe and keep children safe. And I kind of go right now. I go to this one particular church that this gentleman was at, and it is a very small church. And we just moved into this building, and as of right now, we do not have the proper security measures right now to protect our members, and we don't have a security team, and we don't have cameras. But I think it is something that we recently talked about. And for those of you who may be watching this video, you probably will agree with me that keeping your congregation safe is probably the number one priority, especially children. And one of the things that I think we need to start with is trying to get your team together, getting your congregation together, sitting down with them, talking with them on what you can do to prevent these types of incidents, where you can be able to have background checks on employees who work around children or people who work in the church, and also have a way of checking out a lot of the new people that are coming in, and not try to be overly intimidating and just turn it into an armed camp, but have a way where you can actually be able to check people out, see who they are, make sure they don't have criminal records, have their name, have their address, and be able to check on them, so you can prevent the type of incidents like what we just had here in the suburb of Chicago. And one thing about this gentleman, and I don't know anything about this gentleman. I don't know anything about this officer. I don't know who he is, so I can't really say about what was in his mind or who this guy is, this James Pavolo. But whoever he is, I actually was in church on a Sunday, and he was a greeter, a greeting in the church. I just find that to be very disturbing, how the church was able to just allow a man to greet people on a Sunday morning, and he was a convicted felon. And I just find it very disturbing how the church did not even know that he was a convicted felon, and he was already in the church greeting people on a Sunday morning, and he was talking to people and talking to children, and nobody knew. I find it to be very disturbing, and so I just find that to be very fascinating. But I think it is very important to getting your congregation together, talking with your congregation, talking with your team members, and trying to build a security team. One of the things that is desperately needed right now in this church, and since we don't really have the proper security measures, and it's a very small church, and I guess it's and they don't have all the things they need. But I think one of the first things that we need to try to invest in is try to get some maybe cheap surveillance cameras or things that you can put in the church. Maybe you can put it in the walls of the church. That would be one thing you could do. Having certain areas of the church building where children are not allowed unless accompanied by adult. That would be one way to keep your church safe. Having maybe some a plainclothes security team, depending on what your congregation, how far they're willing to go. And I know a lot of the people in our churches here, they're very sensitive, and they don't really want guns, and they don't really want. I mean, you don't have to do that, but there's little things that you can do to keep our churches safe, so we don't end up like Sutherland Springs, Texas, or some of these other instances. We're hearing about so many different instances of all the things that are happening in our churches and all the abuse that seems to be going on, and people like this gentleman. If our church would have had the proper security measures, maybe something like this would have probably been prevented. So one of the things is, number one, having hidden cameras in the church, having certain areas of the church that are usually off access to minors unless accompanied by a trusting adult, and or at least by the adult they brought in. That would be one way. Having a way where you can have certain areas of the church that are open should be locked, especially during a Saturday morning or a Sunday service. And in being able to lock those doors and not having all the doors open so somebody can walk in and maybe interrupt the service or start shooting, because you never know when someone's going to happen. And if there are people that they may be a little late, maybe have something where you have like a little bit of a PA system, or a special key, or maybe a special number that member can call, and maybe they can call a certain person, or at least have somebody that's maybe sitting by the door where they can actually let them in, or maybe somebody that this person can call, and in case they're late, they can call this person and say, "I'm late to church, will you let me in?" So those are just one of many security precautions that we need to start taking. And I find it's a very big shame that we now have to live in a culture where you can't even be safe on a Sunday morning. And church used to be the safest place, and now it's becoming ridiculous. But I feel I think we have to have protections in place. We do have to protect our members of our congregations, and we have to protect our members. We have to protect the children. We have to do whatever we can. And maybe if we start small, it might take years. But I mean, if you're in a church right now, are there people in your church that you may be suspicious of? Are there people in the church that maybe only been there for a few weeks, and they're already in higher positions and higher levels of the church? What are you doing? What are you doing to get the word out? So my best advice right now is that if you're in a church like I am, and they don't have the proper security measures to keep you safe, sit down with them, talk with them, talk about your concerns, and tell them, this is what my concerns are. What can we do as a congregation to keep our members safe and keep our kids safe? So those are some of the things that I wanted to espouse tonight. So that's my opinion, and so I'm going to let everybody go. Thank you. Goodbye. Bye.